Will the Carolina Panthers make Jaycee Horn one of the highest paid cornerbacks in the NFL this offseason? And will Mike Jackson be back starting with them? We'll talk about it right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for watching the show here on YouTube and listening wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Fridays throughout the offseason, as in tomorrow, I'm right back here answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. All you got to do is either at me or DM me over on Twitter at Julian Council to get your questions in for the weekly Friday mailbag right here on Locked On Panthers. And today on Locked On Panthers, we discuss the cornerback room here in Carolina as Jaycee Horn. He's due a lot of money. Mike Jackson, will he be back in 2025, or is there somebody else on this roster who this Panther staff may like a lot, who could actually step into that role that Mike Jackson fulfilled this past year as the corner opposite of Jaycee Horn here in Carolina? Let's start off by talking about Jaycee Horn and the season that he had and the decision the Panthers have to come up with probably this offseason if they're going to be smart about the situation here, as he is due an extension. He played in a career-high 15 games this past year after missing 29 games in his first 3 seasons in Carolina. And honestly, I felt like Dan Morgan and the organization made a calculated risk by deciding to exercise the 5th-year option on Jaycee Horn last May. And when they did that, they decided they're going to pay him $12.4 million in 2025, whether he was able to stay healthy in 24 or not. Now, fortunately for them, he did play in 15 games, missing the final 2 games of the season. You hate to see that, but still, if you get 15 games out of Jaycee Horn, especially after only getting 22 in the first 3 seasons, you'll take that moving forward. And if the NFL eventually goes to an 18-game regular season, getting to 15, playing 14 games, like that's just what you're going to have to hope for at the worst for your players. And not going to say at best, because at best you want them to play all 18, eventually maybe all 17 right now, of course, but playing 14 or 15 games moving forward, that would be the baseline expectation for somebody you're going to spend a lot of money for. And you're obviously hoping that they play in every single one of those games. So by deciding to exercise that 5th-year option, he's getting $12.4 million. And had they decided not to do that, and JC was healthy, played the way he played this past season, they would be on the hook if they could not come to terms for a long-term deal prior to the new league year starting coming up here in March. And also there's the franchise tag deadline that comes at the end of this month. I think we're actually early March, right before you get to free agency. And we talked about this last year with Brian Burns. Had they not come to terms, they would have been on the hook for $20.3 million. Compare that to 12.4. So they save just under $8 million potentially by deciding to go ahead and exercise that 5th-year option back in May instead of not doing it, letting JC prove it on the field. And they were certainly a great argument. I saw both sides to why you would want to pay him and why you would want to wait to see him actually be healthy and play a full season, which you got to see for the most part this past year in 2024, while he was also already set to play again in 2025 under the 5th-year option, having been a first-round pick back in the 2021 NFL draft. We have known that when Jaycee Horn plays, he is an excellent player, and he's one of the best corners in the league. The problem is, outside of Carolina, or if you really pay attention nationally, you did not get to see that or truly know just how good of a player he was. And, well, we saw it this year, and what do you know? Jaycee Horn plays nearly a full season, ends up being a Pro Bowler for the first time in his career, and finally is able to live up to that 8th overall billing back from the 2021 NFL draft. Now, looking at it, Carolina needs to go out there and extend him. Don't mess around. They had a guy like Derek Brown, who in this position last year was coming off a Pro Bowl season. They gave him his money. Before that, They didn't do it. Brian Burns, they let things drag out, and they got to the situation where they had to trade him away, and the compensation certainly was not matching of the player, considering the timing of it and the extension that the Giants had to give Brian Burns. That's why it ended up being that 2 and 2 5s for Carolina last year, which Dan Morgan's done a really good job of being able to get good players out of that and also pick up a second rounder in this upcoming draft, something they did not have thanks to the trade up to get Bryce Young a couple of years ago. But you do not want to be in a situation next year at a premium position, which cornerback is in this pass happy league of the NFL. You do not want to be in position next year around this time. We're having the conversation that we had like with Brian Burns a year ago of whether you pay the guy, if you can afford it, is he going to stick around? Just get it done ahead of time. And the fact that you sat there and you told him, JC, don't worry about all the games that you missed in your first 3 seasons. We believe in you, and we think that you are worth $12.4 million in 2025, whether you're healthy or not this upcoming season. We've seen 22 healthy games, and we're good right there. Now he's played 15 healthy games this past season, and you already bet on him. Kind of similar to the Burns. You had the opportunity to trade him, get those 2 first-round picks and a day 2 pick as well. You said no. You told him what his value was right then, and it's not nearly the same with Jaycee Horn, as no one is asking for Jaycee Horn and giving up 2 first-round picks and also a day 2 pick. But the Panthers already came out and said, we value you. We believe in you, and he was able to pay them off by doing that. Like he paid it forward. So great job by JC, but now he needs to see the money based off of the actions the Carolina Panthers have shown him before by giving him that money when there was a lot of questions of whether he could stay healthy for a full season. Looking at Spot Track to place for contracts, his market value right now is 4 years, $78 million. That's an average salary of $19.6 million. And looking at some of the top 5 contracts among corners in the NFL right now, Jalen Ramsey is getting $24.1 million as the highest paid corner based off of average annual value in the NFL. Pat Surtain, the second, who was selected 9th overall back in 2021, right behind JC. He's making $24 million. He just got paid back in September. Jair Alexander from Charlotte right here, $21 million up there in Green Bay. AJ Terrell, who also got paid in August in 2024, is getting $20.25 million. Denzel Ward, who got paid a couple years ago, is getting $20.1 million. And I'm looking at the 2 guys who recently got paid and comparing what they got to likely what Jaycee Horn is going to get if the Panthers do extend him coming up this offseason, and really whenever he does get extended and gets paid by whatever team in the NFL. And hopefully it will be here in Carolina. First, looking at Pat Surtain, a second, who was drafted behind him. Surtain has been a 3-time Pro Bowler, a 2-time All-Pro, and he was the 2024 Defensive Player of the Year in the NFL, according to the AP and the Pro Football Writers Association. So hard to argue that Jaycee Horn, a 1-time Pro Bowler, who certainly, had he been healthy his entire career, like Surtain, could be a 3-time Pro Bowler at this point in time, could be an All-Pro, maybe Defensive Player of the Year, maybe not. He would have more accolades, I would think, than 1 Pro Bowl. Certainly would be a multi-time Pro Bowl player in the NFL, but he has not been that. And again, Surtain, 4 years, $96 million. It's $24 million per year based off of that. I don't think JC is getting $24 million. Now, he can talk to the Panthers and point to their belief in him and going ahead and already exercise the 5th-year option and say, I want that same contract. You saw that when I was healthy, I'm up to the standard of the guy who was right there also on the board. And now Dan was not here at the point in time. He came later on that offseason, 2021. Actually, maybe, yeah, he was after the draft in 2021. And then Brent Tillis obviously was not here. Of course, Dave Canales, like the people in this building were not here in Carolina when all that happened, when Scott Bitter made that decision, but they were here last year when they bet on JC, and he proved them to be correct. You look at it too, like AJ Terrell, who got signed back in August. He signed a 4-year, $81 million contract. He has never been a Pro Bowler in his career so far in the NFL, and he's getting $20.25 million per year, that 4-year, $81 million contract, somewhere in between there. And I would think ahead of Jair Alexander, just going off of what did the last guy who got paid get paid. And the last guy who got paid was Pat Surtain, and it was $24 million per year. So I can see a $90 million type contract across 4 years for Jaycee Horn and putting him right there in that $22, $23 million range. And maybe Carolina decides, let's go ahead, reset the market and give him 24.5, 25 mil. He's earned it based off of this past season and based off of them betting on him. We still want to see JC play a full season, still want to see JC be able to go out there and again this upcoming fall be able to play 15 plus games, really 17 would be nice, and continue to play at the high level he's played at when he's been out there on the field. Availability has been the only issue, not ability. We've known about that. We finally got to see it in full in 2024. So that's just a look at the contract that he likely could get this upcoming season. 4 years, 78. Nah. Maybe 4 years, 90 something. That would be probably more likely for Jaycee Horn based off of the market value spot tracks put up there, and just also looking at kind of how these things typically work out once the contract situation comes around. So that's one contract situation we're going to be monitoring as far as cornerbacks here in Carolina. What about Mike Jackson? He played in 99% of snaps last year defensively, played in every single game, and was pretty reliable. Will he be back in Carolina next year? And if he is, how much will it cost? We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip for you. Add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So the Carolina Panthers will have conversations, I would think, this offseason with Jaycee Horn on an extension that could potentially reset the cornerback market, or at least put him right there in the top 5 of the highest paid cornerbacks per year in the NFL this upcoming season in 2025. But he's not the only player at corner who Carolina should be talking to about trying to sign an extension. It would be also trying to re-sign Mike Jackson, which I think could and probably should be a priority for the Panthers this offseason as they look at their cornerback position. Last year, the Carolina Panthers were looking at situation in training camp where Dane Jackson, who Dan Morgan had signed in free agency from Buffalo, giving him an opportunity to come over and to start, at least compete for the starting job opposite of JC at that outside corner spot. He had a significant hamstring injury during training camp, and that was going to cause him to miss the first part of the season in 2024. And they decided, let's go ahead and call up Seattle, call up my old buddy John Snyder, who's a general manager up there with the Seahawks, and see if they have anybody that can help us out. And well, who they found was Mike Jackson, who could help them out. And they sent over their 7th round pick, Michael Barrett, who was not going to make the roster, and ended up getting a starting corner who played and started in all 17 games. He finished the season tied for the 8th highest percent of defensive snaps played at 99%, which means 7 players in the NFL this past season played every single snap defensively for their teams, but 99% basically did not come off the field this past year. Did Mike Jackson for Carolina. Had a 68.0 PFF grade, was the 43rd highest rated corner out of 160 or 116 rather, qualifying corners. And he was higher graded than Jaycee Horn, which again, we use PFF as a tool to look at some of these guys, and they do a good job at rating them. Maybe not the best job at rating corners based off of JC was a Pro Bowler, was clearly a better player than Mike Jackson. And then Mike Jackson somehow is rated, I don't really know how that works out, but clearly they felt like Mike Jackson made an impact. And I don't think you can argue against that being the fact. He was tied, or being a fact. He was tied third overall in the league with 17 passes defended. Jaycee Horn finished with 13. Their combined total of 30 passes defended is the highest of any duo in the league. So it would be nice to have both of those guys back. Now, here's the one kind of bugaboo with Mike Jackson. It's just the amount of receptions that he gave up this past year and receiving yardage. And I did see this put out there over on Twitter by somebody recently in the last coming weeks. I'm trying to pull it up here too now. We're looking over at PFF because it was something I meant to bring up, but then now at this time, I'm like, oh, here, let me do that. So this past season, he gave up 60 receptions for 739 yards, which is, well, a ton, and 4 touchdowns. Compare that to Jaycee Horn, and I'm bringing up right now. Jaycee, he gave up 37 receptions, 418 yards, and did give up 5 touchdowns this past year, but significantly less receptions and receiving yardage given up by Jaycee compared to his counterpart, who PFF graded higher than him this past year, which again is just mind-boggling considering we watched the games too, and Jaycee was a Pro Bowler, and I don't know, maybe that's because he was a first-round pick, finally got to play that. The politics of the NFL said this guy should be a Pro Bowler, or just the fact that he's pretty good and was the best corners in the NFL this past year. So that's the one concern about Mike Jackson. Like the Raiders game, had a solid game, but also gave a big pass play, gave a lot of other receptions, made a big play against the Saints. And Dave Canales brought this up when he spoke to the media last back in January during locker room cleanout day, that Mike came in and made an impact and in some key areas too, situationally in some of those games was able to help them. And you can't deny that. Had the interception on a deflection against Atlanta in week 18. He was a good player for Carolina, considering that it's August. Your other corner who turned out to just not be good for you at all. And I wonder, had Dane been healthy all season long, would have things been different if he was not pressed inside with Jackson being the starter opposite of Jaycee on the outside? Would have you been better at that outside corner slot? I don't know what would have happened. But when you lose a corner that late in training camp, and especially where you were situated with Carolina not having the best depth there in the first place and coming off of a 2-15 season, to be able to get somebody who can come in to play every single game for you, nearly every single snap, and to help combine with your already stud corner who is finally healthy this season for the most passes defended against in the NFL, that is really good. And that's absolutely what you would want. And I don't even think Dan Morgan and this coaching staff could have predicted that that is what was going to work out for them. So kudos to them. We talked about this trade out. That was probably the best trade he's made so far, other than, of course, Jonathan Mingo. Getting a 4th for him is just outrageous still. Ha, Dallas, what are you thinking? The question is, does he stay? And he was asked about it, and Mike said, yeah, for sure. I love it here. This is a place I love to be, but I also understand, like in the league, when it comes to this part, it's no feelings involved, so don't get your hopes up. That's what he said on locker room cleanout day. So he's not getting his hopes up, but he is hoping to stay back here. And he did talk about with Derek Brown coming back, Jaycee coming back, how he would really like to see what this defense can do, adding a couple more pieces. And of course, taking a larger step forward than what they did last year, where they were historically the worst scoring defense in the history of the National Football League. Now, the Panthers only paid him $1 million this past year, $1,055,000. So they're not going to be able to pay him that this upcoming year. Spot track to place for contract. His market value is 3 years, $23 million. That's $7 million per year. And I don't hate that. Maybe a little bit more than you probably would want to give Mike Jackson. I would say whatever deal he signs, give the guy a nice signing bonus, and maybe throw some incentives in there if he hits some of those benchmarks to really get up. Like maybe it's a 3-year deal worth like up to $23 million, where really it's like 8 or 9 is fully guaranteed and all of that. Like that would make a little bit more sense to me, just to make, he's still young enough to where he could be your starter with Jaycee, not just this past season, but the next, 2-3 seasons possibly. And that could work out. But there are some other guys that maybe they like that could complicate some situations here as far as Mike Jackson's contract. So we'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth-quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. How will Dan Morgan, Brant Tillis, and Dave Canales approach the cornerback position this offseason here in Carolina? Looking at a couple of the guys that were returning. Jaycee Horn, of course, can be on the fifth-year option. Hopefully, Carolina will go ahead and extend him. That can open up some cap space as well to be able to maybe be smart, but aggressive this upcoming offseason once the new league year begins. And, of course, the legal negotiating period begins on March 10th. And official new league year on March 12th on that Wednesday. Chau Smith-Wade, he's also back, and that's somebody that we're going to touch on here briefly. Played in 14 games last year, starting 4 at nickel. Mentioned Dane Jackson struggling at the nickel spot, lost his job to Chau Smith-Wade, who ended up playing 228 snaps in the slot this past year, had 39 tackles. And one thing that really stood out was his missed tackle percentage. 4.9 was the lowest among defensive backs on the team. And we saw plenty of guys like Dane Jackson like Nick Scott Xavier Woods, like a lot of dudes just having trouble tackling on the second level for Carolina last year. And when you look at the guys he replaced at that nickel spot, Troy Hill, who was benched earlier, not benched, but was cut to allow Chau Smith-Wade and for Dane Jackson to have an opportunity, he had a 13.5 missed tackle percentage. Dane Jackson was 23.3, just hellacious missed tackle percentage. Compare that to 4.9% from Chau Smith-Wade as a rookie out of Washington State, the 5th-round pick. Had a 51.6 PFF grade, so nothing to really be that excited about when you just look at that. 49.6 coverage grade, did have an interception, has 67.2 run defense grade. And that was one of the things that I remember Daniel Jeremiah saying once he was selected by Carolina, that he was a really good tackler, someone who can help you out in the run game. And he had only spent that Senior Bowl week a year ago down in Mobile at that nickel spot. He had been an outside corner when he was up there in Pullman at Washington State, and to be able to change positions, and I know you're still playing corner, but that to move inside somewhere that you're not familiar with and to be the MVP of the game defensively, and then to come in and be able to earn a starting job as a rookie, I'm not caught up in what his PFF grade was. I am. It's nice to see that the run defense grade kind of checks out with also the missed tackle percentage, which is extremely low, and also the reputation that this is a guy who can come in and help you against the run. And Lord knows Carolina needs a lot of help against the run moving forward, and he can be a part of that. So he'll be back starting at that slot position. So that's 2 out of your 3 starters already accounted for in Horn and Smith-Wade. And I would think that Mike Jackson right now would be the favorite if they can come to terms to be that 3rd starter. And then you're good. And it's like, hey, what do you do with the rest of the offseason? Well, Shamar Bartholomew is someone who they picked up off of waivers last year, only played in 5 games, did not play a defensive snap until the final game of the season, week 18 in Atlanta. And that was a product of Jaycee Horn being injured, a product of Caleb Evans, who we'll talk about momentarily, him getting injured in that game. Caleb Farley, who's a free agent, not playing well and being benched in favor of a Caleb Evans to start off that game in week 18, and just the overall attrition of a season. So that's somebody who they apparently like, just weren't willing to get him out there defensively. Special teams fine a couple games, but defensively didn't really want to play Shamar Bartholomew, who was an undrafted free agent, a rookie for Carolina last year, basically redshirted for the most part last season. Now, Caleb Evans is an important name to remember because I just brought up on the other side before taking that quick pause that Mike Jackson, it would make sense. Does Carolina want to pay him, though? The market value, which may or may not be what they actually perceived to be his market value of 3 years, $23 million, which is $7.7 million per year? Or is there somebody else who they already like on this cornerback room, in this cornerback room? Is there somebody they like that maybe they decide, actually, you know what? You can walk and we'll just pay them peanuts to be our starter next season instead of you, Mike Jackson. And they also have experience. And that would be a Caleb Evans, who I've heard this team actually really likes. And he only played in 2 games last year. made that start in week 18 before getting injured against Atlanta. But if you go back to 2023, he played and started in 15 games for the Minnesota Vikings. He has starting experience. He still is a young player in this league, and he spent the majority of the season with Carolina this past year just waiting, watching, and waiting for the opportunity, which he got. And unfortunately, he could not be able to play the full game in week 18. So if they want to try to save some money, like you extend Jaycee, you got Chau Smith-Wade coming back on that 5th round rookie deal, and then you keep a Caleb Evans around one more year to be maybe that starter instead of paying Mike Jackson. Or if you just want to look at overall depth, Jaycee, Chau, Mike Jackson, and then you got Shamar back, and then you have a Caleb Evans. You have 4 guys with starting experience in that cornerback room, and it's pretty similar to what you had this past year, but I wouldn't necessarily say corner was the biggest issue Carolina had. Now, there's a question as far as who's going to be the opposite starter of Jaycee. Once again, it's an annual question, it feels like here, but that question could be answered very easily by either Mike Jackson being re-signed or keeping a Caleb Evans around. Looking at the rest of it, though, do they potentially decide to draft somebody? I did see a week ago Matt Miller post Senior Bowl. He's of the ESPN. He's of ESPN.com. Been on the show before. He mocked Carolina taking a corner in the 2nd round with the 57th overall pick. That was Quincy Riley, the corner out of Louisville. He said, quote, I considered getting Bryce Young another wide receiver at this spot. He has Terrell McMillan, by the way, going to Carolina 8th overall in his most recent 2-round mock draft, but a Panthers defense that gave up a league worst 404.5 yards per game needs a lot of help. Riley is a feisty, fast cornerback who was nagging receivers in one-on-ones all week at the Senior Bowl. So that's somebody he thinks could make sense. I think the best thing for Carolina would be just go ahead and extend Jaycee. Easier said than done, certainly, but it really should not be that big of a decision to make. Like, this is clearly a guy who should be one of the faces of your franchise and one of the building blocks. There's 2 of them defensively. It's him, it's Derek Brown. You took care of Derek last year. Time to take care of Jaycee. Why not go ahead and do that? So extend him, open up some cap space. I would say bring back Mike Jackson. Don't go overboard as far as the deal goes. Make it be respectable and fair, but also have the flexibility to where if they don't work out, you can move on from them. And yes, you want to believe that you are paying a guy and that you can keep him around for the full contract. You don't want to necessarily have it to where, oh, well, if he's not good, I've shown that we don't believe in him. So we're going to have, ability to get out of the deal after a year. But it's just smart business, honestly, because he wasn't a starter out in Seattle, really. And he came out here, played well. He's earned a job. So I would think extend Jaycee, open up cap space there, re-sign Mike Jackson, have him come in and be the projected starter. But why not draft somebody for the future? Now, I don't think 2nd round is what you're looking to do. And if they do decide that's what they want to do, then I don't think you bring back Mike Jackson. Because if you're going to take somebody in the 2nd round to be your starter at corner, I know they did the whole thing with Jonathan Brooks where they knew he was not going to be the starter at running back. Totally understand that. But man, if you're going to do that, I would want that guy to come out there and start right there opposite Jaycee, like day 1, and you already have Chau, and like, there you go. That's your nucleus right there at that cornerback spot with those 3 young guys. That could be a scenario. So they're going to take somebody as early as 2nd round with pick 57. Then, well, I don't know if you need Mike Jackson to stay around, or I guess you could, and just have the ability to get out of it after a year and have that guy come in and be the starter in 2026. But either way, feel like extending Jaycee, opening up cap space, re-signing Mike Jackson, and even drafting someone for the future would be the best way to go about this. And then you would have Jaycee, Mike, that rookie, Chau Smith-Wade, Shamar Bartholomew, Caleb Evans, and whoever they decide to bring in to compete. Like, that would be kind of your cornerback room, just looking at things right now as you would be there in the middle of March, heading in, or really after April, heading into OTAs and the rest of the offseason program as you prepare for 2025. So that's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe or follow the show free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. In the meantime, at me or DM me over on Twitter at Julian Council to get those weekly Friday mailbag questions in. But in the meantime, now, be safe, be happy, be whole. And as always, keep pounding. And I'll talk to you on Friday, where I'll answer your weekly Friday mailbag questions.